And I said, my private card, I hand out to people typically, it's just got my name, my mobile number, and my email. That's all I need to know. Okay, that's all anybody needs to know. So, and the rest is, yeah, fine. Obviously we are Teamup as well, mashallah. But as to the discussion we just alluded to, it goes beyond that. It's much
It's
beyond
true.
that.
That is true. So we have people coming in and people joining us for the session as well. So let's begin. And I just want to take a couple of minutes just to thank both the speakers for being here today. I'll start with welcoming everyone. Welcome everyone to another episode of Duck Stories. So Duck Stories is an event that is run by Telenor Velocity. It's an event series that is trying to bring failure back into passion. It's a platform that discusses failures shamelessly. We invite people to talk about stories that they haven't told anyone, and so that people can learn from their mistakes and what they learned. So today's episode will be focused on the key ingredients that one needs to know when considering to start your own business, along with the do's and don'ts of launching startups the right way. I'm extremely honored to have two of my mentors as speakers here on this platform, and they're going to be talking about their failures and learnings. Zouhair Khaliq, co-founder and partner at Teamup, and Parvez Abbasi, director at the National Incubation Center. So welcome, Zouhair Saab and Parvez Saab.
Thank you very much, Anya. Great to be here.
Thank you. So we all know that starting a business is never easy. You need to decide on what kind of service or product you will be offering, what is your value proposition, who is the audience you'll be targeting, what's a good time to launch, all of that. But how many of you know what it takes to start, run, or grow a business? And is it the right time in your life to even begin one? We're going to be talking about all of these things and especially the key ingredients that one needs to launch a business. So I'll start with my first question to the both of you. I see that potential startups or entrepreneurs or even corporate professionals at their office places, they can often sometimes get swept away in the excitement of their idea or their service or whatever they're launching. And sometimes they end up making devastating yet common mistakes when launching. So in your opinion, Zouhair Saab, and then we can go to Parvez Saab, what are the key ingredients to launching a product or a service successfully?
So thank you, Sanya, for having us on this show. I think the question is obviously multifaceted. It's you got to look at obviously your own product or service and see what that means to anybody. But also you've got to look at the market. You've got to look at what the market is about. Are there, is the market ready for the product that you're going to put in the market? Are there other competitors who will give you a tough time with it? Are you able to then find a place for yourself and find the right niche for the product or service? And then the question is, will you be able to scale it up ahead of the other people if there are other people in the marketplace? A lot of it sometimes, and we'll go to those stories later, but a lot of the times it also depends on the technology that you're going to use. Are you going to use the right technology at the right time? Because often one gets carried away with the technology part of things and without realizing that it could, affect the overall outcome of what you're trying to do. So briefly, that's kind of the things you would want to know. But also one other thing that I would always want to do is say, do you have the right team with you? Because none of these things can be done alone. All of them are absolutely dependent on you finding people around you who work with you as a team and who are thinking the same way that you are and making this go in the same direction.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
So since we're talking about failures, Sanya, I failed to understand the question. So if you could just repeat it for me, my benefit, that'd be great. So that I'm clear.
No, not at all. So I was basically talking about the fact that when people, whether you're working in an office or you're starting a new initiative, people tend to really fall in love with their idea, or they end up making they sort of seem to they forget to see a couple of things and end up making a lot of mistakes. So in that opinion, what do you think is in your opinion, what do you think is the right time to launch? What are the key ingredients that you think are the right ones or the things you need to consider when launching?
Yeah. So, Sanya, from my experience, one of the most important resources is finance, and there's a finite amount of money available. So, my recommendation is, first of all, whatever idea you have, and often, as you correctly mentioned, people fall in love with their own ideas. Validate that idea, and the best way to validate that idea is to go to initially family and friends, and then a wider audience, and just sharing your idea with them. And what will happen is people will come back and say, wow, that's fantastic, or that's the worst idea I've ever heard in my life. I don't think there's anything as a bad idea. There's a question of how you express that idea. I believe that you'll get a lot of feedback from people, saying that, maybe you should consider this, or maybe you should do this, or maybe you should go and speak to such and such person. So I think, first of all, that idea validation. And as you're aware, at the NIC, we have an idea validation process which helps startup founders identify whether they have a validated idea that is worth something, validated by third parties. Once you have the idea validated, then I think, as Zouhair mentioned, the team is very, very important. So, assuming that you don't have a team, what are the type of people, what are the type of services, what is the type of knowledge and background that you need? Do you need somebody, for example, who is a lawyer? Or do you need somebody who's an accountant? Or do you need somebody who's an IT expert? And based on that, then you go and look for those people. And hopefully, I would suggest have at least two more co-founders, so that you can brainstorm the idea and triangulate between the three of you, and then take it from there. So again, validating the idea by talking to people, as many people as possible, and then taking that idea, once it's refined, to other partners and building your own team.
Thank you, Parisa. You summarized it very well. Zouhair Saab, I'd like to start with your story. Obviously, this platform is about sharing stories, even though we will be obviously discussing more anecdotes and a lot of other different, learnings as well. But I'd like for you to take us back to a few decades ago when the dot-com bubble hit in the United Kingdom and Europe in the early 2000s. So you were part of a startup called wcities.com, a web-based online guide with the latest news on dining, restaurants, reviews, somewhat what we have right now as well. And WCities later, I remember, bought a company in Sweden that measured distance and directions through GPS tracking, somewhat like Google Maps of today. And WCities, I believe, failed and went bankrupt. I just wanted you to take us back to that time and explain what happened and what were the lessons that you learned.
Yeah, thank you, Sanya. WCities was this absolutely fascinating product and service at the time. And the idea was you'd go on a website, you would look for a restaurant, a hotel, or even a museum or anything like that, where you wanted to go and spend, let's say, the evening or the weekend. And the way we did it was a young startup. I was brought in at the time as a chief operating officer, and I had some equity in it, and the usual formula. And it's important when you mention this was the dot-com era, as it was called. So the early 2000s. I was there at 2001. And it was as you described. You went up there, you said, hey, I want to take my family out to a restaurant this evening, and I want to have French food, for example. And you would go, you'd Google it. There wasn't a Google at the time, by the way. So you would search it, and you would basically come up with a restaurant, you'd get a review, and then the company we bought, as you referred to, from a little company in Sweden, basically matched it up with saying, okay, now take me there. So what you would then do is conceptually, it would give you a map, and you would be able to walk, drive, or take a bus, whatever you choose your mode of transport, and you would get there. Sounds very familiar. Sounds just like Google Maps today. Okay. Now, the issue there was that we built all this stuff. We did a great ecosystem around it, hoping and depending on the fact that 3G would kick in as a technology, because it would allow you to download the data onto a mobile phone. And remember, at the time, there were no smartphones. Okay, smartphones came in at like 2007. But what we did have was the earliest version of what would be called a smartphone. We had a compact iPad, which was sort of a nice device with a screen in it, and it had a little stylus. And what we did was add to that a plastic sleeve at the back where we had a SIM card in it. And so you could actually, it looked like and acted like a smartphone, right? So it, when
Yeah.
it quacks, waddles, it's a duck, right? So that's exactly what it was. Um, Now, the and we wanted to go to market with it. It was all set to go. We went and did deals with the likes of AOL at the time and BT Genie Internet, as it was called. BT Internet came later, and Telefonica and some of the other guys as well. 3G got delayed, kicked out by a couple of years, and in fact, what happened was that when 3G licenses were put in the market, the governments wanted to charge enormous amounts, and they raked in billions of dollars, and there's a lot of hand clapping saying these guys are brilliant. The governments look at the money they've raised. What it meant also was that most of the companies which had paid out those license fees were now cash strapped. So they were unable to go out and do the thing that they needed to do, which was to roll out the 3G networks. As a result of which, we sat there waiting and waiting, and we were a startup, so we had only so much cash to give. And there was a large team which had been hired at the time, even before I came into the equation. And we spent the next 6 months trying to cut costs, cut teams, kind of reconsolidate ourselves. End of the story, 3G didn't happen for another 2 years, and WCTs went completely bankrupt. We had to wind up everything. And I didn't get paid for like 8 of the 15 months I was working there, and neither did anybody. But the lesson here is that, as I said earlier, you have to be very clear the timing of what you're trying to do. We were ambitious. We wanted to do it too soon. The technology was not available. The ecosystem wasn't there. And again, as Parvez mentioned earlier, finances are the key to all of it. And we just ran out of finances. We ran out of cash. And everywhere we went to look for cash, they'd say, no thanks. Because by that time also what was happening was the dot-com bubble was beginning to explode. And if you met the word telecom or the word technology, I would used to joke that you would have skid marks on the floor and a slamming door, and people would just they just didn't want to know at the time. And so this was a very harsh lesson we learned, that timing and technology and the interface of those is so important in a startup situation.
That's true. And if you could go back, I mean, this is just a very cliche question, but if you could go back in time, knowing what you know now, how would you have started this company, and what would you do differently?
So what would have happened differently was that we, as very key, the finances were limited. We only planned for a roadmap of the next, let's say, 6 to 8 months, a runway, and because of events totally outside our control, everything got shifted out. The launch got shifted out. You couldn't do it. And looking back, what you would want to do is to plan it in a much better way. Make it a smaller, more contained operation, so that as and when you got the opportunity, you could then scale up. In our case, the mistake was everything had been scaled up already. And then all dressed, and there was no party to go to. And that was the issue.
And also, I think another concept here is the concept of de-accelerating. Some startups, when they launch, I think that was probably the case in yours as well. You launched and you were not able to launch, but like there are startups who end up launching and are not able to. They grow so fast that they need to de-accelerate. So I believe that's
Absolutely.
also the case.
And we tried to do that. We tried to contain everything. We laid off people, cut down the number of cities, blah, blah, all of that. But it was too late. In fact, if you look back on, as you said, we should have planned it better and scaled up in a much slower fashion. But again, as most startups will know, you get carried away with your own excitement and the whole idea. Needless to say, at the end of the day, that technology, all of it, which had something like $10 million put into it, was sold for $50,000. Okay.
Wow.
There you go.
And Zouhair sir, one last follow-up question to all of this. If you, I mean, going back, I know this is ages ago, but if you go back, do you remember something that you did that you do wish everyone was doing? I mean, the question somewhat is, I mean, I want to direct it in the sense that, you know, you guys were thinking about doing something like Google Maps is doing now.
Yeah.
You know, restaurant reviews, food reviews, all of that. So is there something that you thought of doing at that point in time that you wish somebody comes up with now? Is there an idea that was there before?
Yeah, lots of ideas, but you know, the irony of today's situation is that whatever you've thought of, somebody's thought of it before you. And that's one part of it. The other part is, to kind of segue a little bit from your question, is that you can have ideas dime a dozen. Okay, the actual nuts and bolts is how can you execute it. If you don't execute in the right way at the right time, then your idea is worth nothing, and somebody else will take it and run with it, as it happened in this case.
Thank you for sharing that story, Zouhair Saab. Parvez Saab, I'd like to move towards you now. I mean, I personally know your story. We'd like for the audience to hear it as well. You've had quite a journey, and quite a few, you know, you've opened and closed many businesses. You also took the right time to find the right co-founder. I think Zouhair Saab and you are an absolute, you know, great team together, the dynamic duo, I would say. So I would like to know your failure stories, just put all together, your struggles, and just what led you to creating Teamup now, and obviously partnering or teaming up with Zouhair Saab and founding the National Incubation Center.
Sure. I think in one word regarding my failures, I would say that there are none. And the reason why I say this is because it's very interesting that, you know, often we get asked this question that, you know, what are your failures? And I'm thinking to myself, as I look back on the last 30 odd years of work, to be honest with you, there haven't been really any failures. And the reason for that is because every experience, have we lost money? Yes. Have we lost friends? Yes. Have we lost people? Yes. Have we lost opportunities? Yes. But I don't see them as a failure. I see them as an opportunity to learn. And I believe that if you can learn from that experience, then that would go on to help you. So as Zouhair mentioned regarding the .com, I'm sure there must have been learnings that helped later on in other areas where he progressed, and look back on those so-called failures and benefited from them. And perhaps I would even allude to the fact that even the loss of 10 million may have ultimately resulted in the benefit of 100 million for another company that he subsequently worked on for. Would that be a fair comment, Zouhair?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And therefore, you know, I don't see it as a failure. I mean, I'm sorry to say this, and I know that a lot of people have a different view on this, but absolutely, I don't see anything as a failure. The only failure is when you give up. If you give up on something, then I believe you have failed. In fact, I believe that the so-called failure is a prerequisite for success. So that means that if anybody wants to be successful, they have to have failed. And if somebody says, and you know, if you stand up in a classroom, for example, or in an office or in a town hall and say, how many people have failed? Very few people will put their hands up, because culturally, especially in Pakistan, we see failing as a taboo, as something negative. But if you see it as an opportunity to move forward, to learn from that experience, then I think you would be able to benefit. And Sanya, I'd like to give an example, a real life example of this. And I really appreciate the fact that you guys are celebrating these so-called failures. If you look at a child, I'll give this example, anywhere from the age of about 9 months to 12 months, when they first start to walk, what happens is that the child gets up, takes a step and falls down, right? And what typically happens is that the parents, they don't go around saying, oh, bevkoof bache, tujhe chalna nahi aata. They probably say something like, Jabash, well done, and they encourage that child. And when the child realizes that, you know, it's done something good, it actually is motivated to try again. Subsequently, somehow later on in life, we keep teaching our children, the opposite. Don't fail, don't do this, sit down, don't ask questions, and so on and so forth. So my point being is, to be successful, failure is a prerequisite. As you know, Sanya, at the NIC, we teach people to fail fast, fail forward, and fail often. This is very important, that they're able to learn from those experiences. So I hope that answers your question regarding
That
failure.
does. That does definitely. And I love the concept of failure as a prerequisite to success. Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
Absolutely.
so for the audience, I would say that look back on your lives, and if you can put your hand on your heart and say that you have not failed, then I think probably you're going to end up failing life as a whole. So fail as quickly as possible and learn from that experience. Coming back
I,
to the NIC, I think it's also very important that, especially for the younger people, that chapters in your life is a little bit like a book. You go from one chapter to the next chapter to the next chapter, or a series of episodes on Netflix, for example, where the story is drawn out for you. And I believe that the previous experiences in your life help to prepare you for the next chapter in your life. And ultimately, I think that we were very fortunate, Zouhair and myself. There's a whole story around it, to be in the right place at the right time, supported by great people, great mentors, the government, etc., etc. But also our own previous lives kind of came together at a point where we actually benefited from all of those previous quote unquote failures and mistakes and learnings. And some of them were obviously very good as well. So essentially, from my side, and I think this is very common, the discussions that I had with Zouhair very early on, I think it was around 2013, 14, we were living in the UK. We were in very similar situations where, our kids were either going to university or just recently graduated. We were also at an age where we thought, what are we going to do for the rest of our lives? God has been very kind. We had made fame and fortune. And we thought that over many cups of tea and coffee, we thought that why don't we try to do something for Pakistan? And that's where the idea was really born, is that how can we work towards doing something for Pakistan? And we realized that the youth is a very, very powerful tool for Pakistan's development. If we were to enable them with technology, we would be able to become a successful nation. We also realized that young people, while they have a lot of energy, they have a lot of ideas, etc., they don't really understand business. They don't understand the financial elements. They don't have the kind of experiences or network or resources that are required to be successful. So we thought that, between us, we had a number of years of experience. We developed a network. We had a lot of people who we knew, and we could reach out to them and ask for their help and their support. And obviously, at the same time, we're very fortunate. And timing, you often say this, you were just lucky. And I do believe in luck. But what I do believe is that why is it that some people are more lucky than others? And you have to answer yourself that question. If you're going to sit around waiting and not doing anything, chances are you're not going to be very lucky. But if you are running around and you're doing, let's say, 5, 10, 15, 20 things, you may not be lucky in all of them, but you're probably going to be lucky in 2 or 3 of them. So we got lucky. And at that time, the government of Pakistan was also interested in helping the youth to create more jobs, etc., etc. We shared the idea, the concept of the National Incubation Center with them. They loved it. Of course, we brought in our partners, Mobilink Jazz, and then together we built what is today known as the National Incubation Center. And I'm really humbled and I'm proud that we managed to create a network of volunteers, mentors, coaches, and corporates from all over the world. People, it's amazing how much they are willing to support you and help you once you start the journey. So as a testament to all of those people, we were very fortunate to win a number of awards, international awards. And more recently, Sanya, you may be aware that the United Nations ITU has also awarded the National Incubation Center program out of many, many other countries that they were competing for this prize. So I hope that answers your question.
That does. Thank you, and congratulations. That's seriously a huge milestone for Teamup and for the National Incubation Center as well, especially from where it started out. 5 years in as well. I want to go back to one of the stories. I'm picturing you and Zouhair Saab sitting together in London, having coffee and just talking to each other. Obviously, that was the start of a partnership that you guys thought of doing together and co-founding a company. And this question is, Parvez, for you, because I feel like there are a lot of startup founders out there who are struggling to find the right co-founder. And you need to really, it's like a marriage. We always say that starting a startup with somebody or a business with somebody is literally like a marriage. So how did you choose your co-founder, number one, and what advice would you give to somebody out there who's looking for starting a business or looking for the right co-founder?
So, Sanya, it's a very challenging. It's like a marriage. Finding the right people to work with is very, very challenging. You have to find the right mindset. I think I've been very lucky, and the reason why I've been lucky is maybe I've been trying a little bit harder than many more people. So, just to give you an example, in the process, I actually reached out to a few people. So Zouhair, of course, I never shared this with him, but he was my first choice. But I did have a couple of other people in mind. And again, fortunately, I say this, they decided against it. One of them said that they had actually recently received a job in Telenor in Thailand, so they couldn't join me. So they declined. The other said that this was not going to take off. It was a waste of time. They didn't understand it, so they decided not to join. But I'm very fortunate, and Zouhair may recall, it took many, many months. And this is the beauty of our relationship. The core fundamentals, I think, are very similar between Zouhair and myself. I think the ethos of hard work, quality. I would also share, integrity, etc., etc. There's no two ways about it. We're definitely on the same page. But our approach to work is quite different. And I think that's really important in a founder and a co-founder relationship, whereby those differences actually help you to balance. So I like to think that I'm often very trigger happy, shake a hand and we cut a deal without the business plan, without all of the other things in place. But Zouhair reminds me that no, we need to sign an NDA, we need to have an agreement, we have to put the processes in place, the governance in place, etc., etc. And I want to say this, that again, I've learned not only from this relationship, but from my former relationships as well, that opposites actually are very good. So if you're looking for a co-founder, avoid people who are like you, avoid people who are similar to you. Yes, they should have the same ethics, values, etc., but they should be professionally different from you. It's a little bit like a cricket team. Imagine if you had all of the cricket team full of batsmen. Who's going to be doing the bowling? Hence, that balance has to be there.
I think it's balancing the yin and the yang in exactly those words, because you've got to be able to find people who complement you rather than people who are exactly the same as you, because then you'll all run in the same direction without realizing that there is another direction to take as well. So absolutely.
That's true. And I'm so glad, Zouhair Saab, you said yes as well, because it's a good partnership.
So am I.
Yeah.
So am I.
Zouhair Saab, again, there's another story that I'd like you to share with us. This is about your corporate failure story that you mentioned earlier. So you mentioned that IT Telecom came in. It was a company launched while you were CEO at Mobilink. Please tell us the story. Tell us that story in your point of view when Wateen launched. What were their aspirations at that time? How did they raise funds, and why they were not able to sustain themselves when launching? And you, I believe, came in later in the structure to restructure the company and everything. So I would just like to know that story and how it came about.
Yeah, this is going back to about 2005 sort of time frame, 2005 and 6. And remember, again, Wateen was kind of a startup, because although backed by a big corporate from the UAE, it was essentially a startup where people went in and adopted a new idea, which was, while everybody else was doing the mobile side of things, they wanted to go into the fiber optic side of things and make sure that they could give people, customers, the the kind of the ability to put traffic on the optic fiber as well. I think if you look back on it now, uh, again, with the similar lessons to be learned, they looked at the market without realizing that a lot of other people were also thinking the same. And they thought they had the unique idea and that they were going to get ahead with it. It was also about the same time, and it was all triggered because at the time, PTCL, as we know it, was the only owner of what is called optic fiber cable, north to south, east to west in Pakistan. And it was absolutely essential a tool because when you were running the mobile networks, you needed to lease those lines from PTCL so you could carry your traffic from north to south, east to west, and even internationally. Uh, we realized at some point at Mobilink at the time that it was in our interest and it made perfect sense for us to lay our own optic fiber. In fact, it was the way we did the business plan, it turned out to be an 11-month payback for us. And we were spending lots and lots of money on PTCL leasing at the time. I actually went to the then CEO of PTCL, who happened to be an old colleague of both Parvez and I in the early days at Mobilink. But his response was, no, I'm not going to give you a discount. I'm not going to make it easy for you. And we are going to charge what we do because we are the only game in town. And that sort of, pardon the expression, pissed me off quite a bit. And I went back and I said, we're going to do this and make our own optic fiber network. As I said, 11-month payback, so it was approved very quickly by our board. Around the same time, watching us, Wateen also decided, hey, that sounds like a great idea. We'll do this as well. And again, the question is, it's all about the execution. Okay, we executed in that very short period of time. And we knew we had a customer, us. Okay, we had a very big network at the time, and we knew that we needed this. And so we were immediately, obviously, financially, completely, set up in the right way. Wateen's problem was that it launched all of this without really having a guaranteed customer at the time. And remember, while they were doing it, obviously we separated from PTCL, so PTCL was now left with less revenue. And in fact, instead of reacting to competition, it actually jacked up the price. And so Wateen's ability to then, when they executed over a longer period of time, so the product the time to market was much longer. And when they came to market, PTCL had jacked up the price, and there were a couple of other players who would also enter the same field. Now, between them, they were all trying to kill each other by trying to reduce the price. And what happened was that there weren't enough buyers. Okay, so we had our own network. Ufone went to PTCL. Telenor stayed with PTCL at the time. Later, maybe did something different. And suddenly, these guys had really nobody to sell to. Okay, and they invested this huge amount of money in the fiber cable, and it was set up to, and they borrowed enormous amounts of money at the time. And remember, it was the heyday of telecom, so the banks were dishing out money without thinking as well. And they just didn't realize that this would not happen. And what happened in the end was that they failed spectacularly in terms of their cash flows. They were heavily burdened with debt. And that was after I'd left Mobilink and I was invited back to help restructure that and IT Telecom at the same time. And in the end, what we had to do was, again, we had to, consolidate all of it. We had to roll back their heavy expenditures. We had to reduce the teams. We had to find a new line of business, which was international calling, which was, something that was viable at the time, and actually then help them go in over a 3-year period from a complete, bleeding couple of $1 million a month to actually making a couple of $1 million a month instead. And that journey again taught you the very fact that you've got to be able to assess your market, you've got to be able to pace yourself with the rest of the market, you've got to understand what other people are doing and what their strengths are. But again, in this case, as Parvez mentioned earlier, they got carried away with their idea. They got this is it, this is what we will do. And it turned out to be an unmitigated disaster at the time.
That is true. And that's quite a story. I mean, I feel like this is all institutional knowledge, all market knowledge that not a lot of people know about these days. So thank you for
One of
sharing
the,
on our platform.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And one of the things to paraphrase something that Parvez said differently, these experiences stay with you about how not to run a company, how not to start a business. And I can go back to so many other experiences in my life where you learn and you think at the time, oh my God, this is a disaster, this is a failure, this is a mistake.
Yeah.
But what you're actually doing is actually chalking up the experience. And I remember one of our shareholders in Mobilink, when I was first joining them, he said, Zouhair, remember, everyone can make a mistake once, and that's okay. We're all human. You make
Yeah.
it a second time, oops, you look like you're a little stupid. If you make it the third time, you should be taken out and shot, because that means you haven't learned from the mistakes. So
Exactly.
the biggest message here is learn from the failures and turn them around into successes, because that's the only way to move forward. And don't dwell on them. Just remember the lesson learned and move with it to the next stage.
That's true. Thank you so much for sharing that story and for the message as well, Zouhair Saab. Parvez Saab, another question for you. This is something that I personally, I feel like I can learn from you as well. We need people to make our ideas a success. Nothing happens without people. That's a given. You can't. I mean, if you're working alone, you're just working on your idea. But obviously, when you start sharing it with people, when other people start believing in your passion and your idea, that's when the story gets going, right? So, in your opinion or in your experience, I feel some people support you, some people are the reason for your failure. Not you in general, but in your opinion, how do you think is choosing the right person to execute your idea? How important that is, and how do you choose your people?
Yeah, so generally speaking, Sanya, there are two types of people in this world. And that includes the audience that we have here today as well. There are people who find a problem in everything that they see. And then there are others who say, maybe there's a solution for this. If it is an old age saying that, if you look at half a glass of water, some people will see it as half empty and some people will see it as half full. It's your own perspective, but that perspective is very, very important. So what will happen is that, if people around you, and if you kind of get this negative vibe from them, where they are always trying to identify issues and challenges and problems and why it can't be done, maybe you want to run away from those people. And there are other people who perhaps are more, let's say, creative and looking at solutions and identifying, ways to perhaps do things, looking at it in a positive light. Those are the kind of people that you need to bring on board. Because look, the naysayers will always find an excuse all the time. So just try to avoid those people who, you'll be surprised, Sanya, and we've done this not only at Teamup at the Incubation Center, but some of the other companies as well. We've hired some really, really talented people, and we found that they were not having the right kind of an attitude, and therefore they failed. They failed miserably, and they helped us to fail, quote unquote. But lesson learned from there, we've got team members who were, frankly speaking, very inexperienced, given new roles and new challenges, and they rose to the challenge and they excelled in the work given that opportunity. So my view is that these naysayers, they're a little bit like cancer. The further you can stay away from them, the better you are. And those people who pick you up, who take your idea, who challenge you, they don't say, everything is hunky-dory. They challenge you in a positive light. Those are the kind of people you want to do. I genuinely believe that there is nothing in this world which is impossible. Everything has an answer. Everything has a solution. And, if we try to work towards that solution, we'd not only be helping ourselves, but we'd hopefully be helping the rest of the world. And if you look at the example of, for example, the environment, recently, people have become much more conscious of the environment. And therefore, we're trying to find solutions that would help clean the environment. And that would help us not only in today's world, but hopefully future generations as well. These are challenges that maybe 30 years ago or 20 years ago, people never even considered. But now people are thinking about them and they are finding solutions beyond the norm. So, as I said, stay away from negative people, as simple as that.
If I can add a little bit to that,
Of
and I
course,
noticed one
of
of the
course.
questions, I noticed one of the questions in the QA forum. Uh, they say, oh, the co-founders will never have the same enthusiasm because it's my baby and not theirs. Well, that's exactly the issue, because I've often enough had these conversations with startups, and I said, so how much does your co-founder own of the company? He said, oh, I've given him 1% or 3% or something. And I'm thinking, well, clearly that co-founder will not have the same passion for this as yourself. If you own 97% of it, the person only owns 3. So
That's true.
you got to having going through everything that Parvez has said in terms of who you choose. You also have to make sure that they have a similar stake in the process. Okay, because that's the only way this will then move forward in the right direction, and you will get their passion, their commitment, and their integrity to go with you. Otherwise, you're not treating them in the right manner.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to now take the conversation to the Q&A. We do have a couple of questions and some comments that we'll be taking as well. I think the first question, Parvez, maybe you can answer this. It's directed for the NIC. Bilal Sheikh is asking, how does the NIC help startups in raising money?
Yeah, so before I answer that question, from my experience, money is around 20% of the success factor. I've had the privilege of working with thousands of founders, hundreds of startups, and therefore I say this with some degree of confidence that money and funding is only 20% of the success factor. I can tell you companies that have had millions and sometimes billions and they've failed. So why I'm pressing on this point is don't think that money is going to solve all your problems. When you get funding, it creates a new set of problems. But to answer your question, there are a number of support mechanisms at the National Incubation Center where we have a list of angel investors who support startups from early stage, anywhere from 10,000 to 100,000 US dollars. And then we have a number of partners who are venture capitalists who are taking on ticket sizes for $1 million and above. And in fact, we have an investor conference coming up next month. We have these investor conferences and demo days regularly. So feel free to reach out to us and we're happy to evaluate, look at your presentation, your pitch, hope to refine your pitch and improve it, and then introduce you to those investors, whether they be angel investors or VCs, according to your requirement.
Thank you for that. We have another, an anonymous attendee. It's more of a story, so I'm just going to summarize it. This person basically has started a business, but because of COVID, even though they generated revenues, they created great impact nationally and internationally, but because of COVID, their operations slow down and their revenues are nil. They are now considering what to do, either to go back into a 9-to-5 salary package and a job with a good organization, or to keep going forward because they do see great potential in this business. So any word of advice or anything that you guys can say to this attendee?
So on my part, I would say that do both. So get a job, earn some money on the side, and continue with your idea. And once you're ready, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years down the road, bring in the knowledge, experiences that you've had from the past, good and bad. Hopefully you'll have some co-founder or you'll get some co-founders, and then restart. That's my 2 cents.
That's actually
what I'd add to that is that consider maybe a little bit of a pivot of some kind, because it's often that you can tweak the business plan or the product to a slightly different angle and see if that works at this point in time. So I think that's also worth doing, because as again, to reinforce something we both said in the earlier part of this conversation, never quit, okay? Because if you're convinced that your idea is good and you think that it's going to make a difference in the world, don't quit, because again, it goes back to the timing issue. Maybe the timing isn't right yet, but you've got to persevere and you've got to make sure that you keep going. And yes, if it helps to get a job for the time being, it's a practical thing to do. But don't let go of something that you have dreamt of or wanted to do for a while just because things got difficult at this time.
I absolutely agree with you on that, Zouhair. I think most people don't know this, but YouTube was never meant to be a video-based sharing videos online platform. It was initially meant to be a dating website. So the founders realized that people don't want to share their videos date via videos, and they ended up doing something else with it. So yeah, they pivoted. So we have another question. How is the way IoT-based startups are having a business model at NIC? So probably the question is are there any IoT-based business models at NIC?
Sorry, Sania, when you say IoT-based business models?
Yes, IoT, yes.
Yeah, of course, there are a number of, and of course, IoT is a very emerging technology. So there are a number of startups working in this particular space. For example, home automation, for example, smart helmets. There are obviously other areas, for example, in the sporting space. So really and truly, I don't understand the nature of the question, but to answer you, yes, we have a number. In fact, I would also encourage the questioner to visit the National Incubation Center website, nicpakistan.pk, where you can see all of the different startups by genre. So if you simply look at IoT, you'll get a whole list of them, and you can then, take it further from there.
Thank you so much. Another thing that another question anonymously is I believe it's connected to the talk we were having of people falling in love with their idea. So the question is, what advice can you give us to keep a check on our emotional involvement of our business?
Zouhair, you're much more emotional than I am, so maybe you want to take that one.
So I would suggest that what you do is exactly what we said earlier. Go for market validation. Now, the first kind of market validation, as said earlier, is family and friends. Go talk to them and see if this is really as exciting as you think it is. Okay, and once you got that validation, you might even want to do a little test pilot in the market space and go talk to people who are independent of your friends and family to see if they are less emotional in giving you the feedback. And that's, it's a process. You can't really, obviously you have to be emotional about your product and service. Your idea has to be something you passionately believe in, and that's emotion. But it's very, very practical to go out and make sure other people believe it too. That's the only way to do it.
Definitely.
I would just add, Sania, that to be emotional, you have to stop being anonymous. So maybe that's something to think about for you.
Well said.
Very deep. Well said. So Sarah, Asif has asked, I'm curious to know how and what you think about startup closures during COVID. For example, Mock Online, which was also incubated at the NIC. Is that an investment challenge or not the right time or something else?
So, my view on that is that, look, it wasn't completely an investment challenge because the situation changed. You look at the offering that Mocha had, and you look at the environment right now where you don't want people coming into your home from outside who you may or may not know. Okay, and the whole premise of Mocha was you could go online, select somebody for the day, for the week, and they would come in and do the job that you wanted them to do. So the timing just got very, very badly affected because of the circumstances of what COVID happened, the way COVID happened. Now, obviously, the fallout of that is that because you're constrained in the business, naturally finances and revenues will get affected, and then it becomes a victim of the financial aspect of it. But that was I would argue that was a subsequent event, and the original event was that things changed in the environment and it was out of anybody's control. Those things will happen. My earlier story about WCTs was kind of in those things as well.
Farisab, do you have anything that you would like to add?
No, I think, if you look at Silicon Valley, for example, which is the mecca of startups, less than 10% of startups, in fact, 3% of them succeed. So 90+% of them fail. Less than 1% of them get funding. So these are real statistics that we have to keep in mind. I think with regards to Mocha in particular, it's important to answer this. I have a lot of respect for the founders, Sanya and Mustafa, fantastic people. But, as Zouhair mentioned, COVID has had an impact on businesses where that impact is so significant that it's challenging for them to come back. As I said to you earlier, I don't believe in failure. I don't believe in the end. I think this is another chapter, and I think that the phoenix will rise from the ashes, and you will see them move on to bigger and better things.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. Bilal Sheikh is asking, and this is probably going to be the last question we take. Bilal Sheikh is asking, how important is traction in raising money? I believe this is the same Bilal Sheikh who asked the earlier question.
Sorry, could you repeat the question, Sanya?
The question is, Zouhair sir, how important is traction in raising money?
Well, absolutely. I mean, traction is key to raising money. You've got to be able to go out to raise the amount of money that you need to take your startup, to the next stage. And again, the issue here is, look, the first time you go out and ask somebody is not the first time you're going to get somebody to write a check for you. That's not life. Maybe it happens in a movie or one of these drama serials, but that's not real life. Real life is going again and again and again. And what you will learn, and I think what you should be learning, is that each time you pitch to somebody, and when they ask you the questions and when they give you the pushback, learn from it. Learn what you've been doing wrong. Understand what else you need to be doing to get that traction for the next move. Okay, and this will happen maybe 3, maybe 5, maybe 30 times. The secret again is that you will succeed when you realize that you're not going to give up. And that's the only way to get, it's a very simple story again, going back to very basics. Look at a little ant when it is trying to crawl up a wall. It falls over many times, several times. But if you keep watching, you'll realize that it actually makes it to the other end in the end, right? And that's just a little ant. Imagine what a human being who has commitment and believes in what they want to do, how successful they will be if they just don't give up.
That's true, and very beautifully put as well, Farisab. So with that, I would like to close today's session. It was time flew, and I'm just glad I had a great time discussing, learning about different things in your stories as well, Zouhair and Farisab. I'd like to obviously sometime in the future call you guys again on different platforms and talk some more a bit about your journey. Thank you for taking out your time, especially Parvez, you as well. I know you're sitting in London right now. It must have been, taking time out from your afternoon as well. So thank you for doing that. And Zouhair, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanya.
Pleasure has been all ours, Sanya. And I want to thank all of the audience for attending today, especially Miss Anonymous for asking those great questions. At the close, I want to remind everybody that failure is not the opposite of success. It is a vital part of success. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Take care.